Welcome, welcome, welcome. Everybody, welcome. Part of our continuing series where we talk to professors, lawyers, writers, reporters, activists, anybody on the left, anybody on the right, anybody who can form complete thoughts and talk intelligently about the topic of political polarization and where we are at today. We want to package all the interviews and provide them directly to you, the public, so that you could do this thing that was very popular when I was in high school called thinking for yourself. Maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't, who knows. With us today, it is our honor to have Douglas P. Fry. He's the professor and chair of the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Douglas P. Fry is the professor and chair of the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. He's earned his doctorate in anthropology in 1986. He's written extensively on aggression, conflict resolution, and war and peace. He's currently researching how clusters of neighboring societies' peace systems manage to live without war. His most recent book, Nurturing Our Humanity, is co-authored by Rain Esler. Esler and Frey argue that the path to human survival and well-being in the 21st century hinges on our human capacities to cooperate and promote social equity, including gender equity. He's also the author of Beyond War, Human Potential for Peace, Keeping the Peace, Conflict Resolution, and Peaceful Societies Around the World, Cultural Variation and Conflict Resolution, Alternatives to Violence. He's also the recipient of the 2015 Peace Scholar Educator Award and the Peace and Justice Studies of the Peace and Justice Studies Association. He's an expert in human potential for peace building, human nature, war, peace systems, peace anthropology, the evolution of restraint, learning, aggression, nonviolence, and pro-sociality. Some of his current projects include peace systems can be defined as clusters of neighboring societies that do not make war on each other. Peace systems hold lessons for how to create and maintain peace. The Peace Systems Project is briefly explained in a 2-minute video, Learning from Peace Systems, produced by Peter Coleman. And here's some of the research the professor's done, Nurturing Our Humanity, how domination and partnership shape our minds, lives, and future, war, peace, and human nature, the convergence of evolutionary and cultural views, Encyclopedia of Violence, Peace, and Conflict, Beyond War, the human potential for peace, and anthropological challenge to assumptions about war and peace, Keeping the Peace, Conflict Resolution, Peaceful Societies Around the World, and Cultural Variation, Conflict Resolution, Alternatives to Violence. This is one particular study that I looked at, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's check in. Professor, how did I do? Did I say anything wrong? Is there something we need to correct?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. This is a real pleasure, and I look forward to talking with you about these topics. So just a couple additions that might be useful. The Nurturing Our Humanity book is with Riane Eisler, and Riane is a luminary in this topic of gender relationships and has presented and worked over decades on what she calls the domination and partnership models. And basically in the book, Nurturing Our Humanities, we pick up this important model that Riane, or a continuum, if you look at it that way, with partnership societies and institutions on one hand, and domination societies and institutions on the other. And it's a continuum. And so we're really trying to explore, for example, how the United States, and in fact any nation, or globally, how we could become more partnership oriented and work together for the common good, for humanity. So I just wanted to mention that book now is out as an audiobook as well. You can get it on Amazon and so forth. And it's an interesting book, so I'm just plugging it a little bit, and also clarifying that it's Riane Eisler is how she pronounces her name, and she's really quite a woman. She's in her 80s now, and a real luminary. So it was an honor to work with her on that project. The other thing I can add is my wife, Genevieve Suyak, who's also a professor here in our department, and I collaborated on doing a short film about peace systems. And that one is available on YouTube. You can just Google if you're interested in hearing a more lively, coming to life type of presentation about peace systems. It's 8.5 minutes, and it's called Path Away from War, the Science of Peace Systems. So if anybody wants to hear a little bit more in film version, that's definitely a good start to think about peace systems.
Okay, more resource, and that's on
Uh,
Netflix.
not half away, sorry. A path
A
away
path.
from.
I'm sorry. My bad. A
I'll have to
path.
think about your title you came up with. Maybe there's potential there for a
Yeah,
title.
that's what I thought. I thought, okay, hey, we'll stop it halfway. I thought,
Yeah, yeah.
away from war, not half away from war. Both good titles, but mine was imaginary. This is the actual one. Path Away from War: The Science of Peace Systems. If I said the name Gene Sharp.
Oh, Gene Sharp is one of my heroes.
Okay. All right. That's all
Absolutely.
I wanted to hear.
He was, unfortunately, as you probably know, he's passed away a few years
Yeah.
ago.
Good man, did a lot of good stuff. Deeply inspired me.
And there's a wonderful documentary about his life, actually, that's available online as well. It's about
Really?
an hour long, maybe a bit over an hour. It's really delightful. I can send you the link later. I don't
Please,
offhand know the
please.
title. Yeah, documentary about Gene. No E on the end of Sharp. Sorry, you're
Oh, I
dealing with a
thought I
professor
spelled that
here.
right. Okay. All right.
I'll keep my mouth shut after this.
No, I'm spelling. I thought I was like, oh, I got this right. Okay. Gene
Yeah.
Sharp or something like that. Close to spelling of his name.
Well,
World famous
let's see.
peace advisor, super academic, really helped teach how people can achieve systems of change peacefully. His book, Nonviolent Warfare, changed my life. I'll leave it there.
Well, here's a documentary that's based on Gene Sharp's work, really, which is at the tip of my tongue, and that's Bringing Down a Dictator. Bringing Down a Dictator.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, you've seen that one. Yeah. That's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, because he had done it. He had done it, and he had advised people, and then he got himself close to the front line a couple of times. I mean, he really put his feet where his mouth was. Let's get to the meat and potatoes. So the first question I need to ask is political polarization bad in America, in your opinion? And then the second one is, what solutions do we have, given your range of experience about peace and conflict around the world?
Yes. Well, thank you for the question. And again, thank you for having me on. So bad. Bad in what ways, I guess would be my first thinking. So if political polarization keeps people from acting pro-socially and cooperating with each other and getting things done and showing care and compassion, I think we could make a value judgment, at least I would, that yes, that's bad. That's not good. I'm an anthropologist. I'm not sure if that was mentioned anywhere in the intro, and I understand if it wasn't because it's not really highlighted. But as an anthropologist, I'm used to thinking about how we really are a social species and we need each other. And in every society, even societies that are racked by violence and polarization, we're part of a larger unit and we really need to function and get along well with each other. So that's another reason, another more intellectual type of reasoning for saying, yeah, I would say it is bad. And specifically in the United States, I'm old enough, you see some gray beard here.
I didn't want to say so, but yeah, that's part of the question is because the older people can know. I can say for a fact it's bad because I've been around to know it wasn't like this before.
Exactly. You put the words in my mouth and you put them in just right.
Sorry.
Yes. No, I'm
trying to push you.
I'm thanking you
and
for
I
that
spent
one.
5 minutes telling I'm not pushing you in the interview. Use whatever you say is wherever you so.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I just meant that's exactly the point that I was going to make. I am old enough that I remember the first half of my life. Democrats and Republicans, for instance, at the end of the day, they valued what was important for the country more than for the party. And in recent decades, I'm just aghast over and over. Okay, I guess I'm used to it by now, but just how can they be so divisive and so self-centered and just focusing on what they individually want rather than thinking more holistically for what is the social good, what is good for the country at the end of the day. And that just applies across the board, doesn't it?
Professor, I'm sorry, Professor. I've heard from many newspapers the problem is only on the right and the left has done nothing wrong and has no need to change at all. And the problem is just Trump and just on the right. Fair analysis?
Well, it sounds a bit one-sided to me, as a social scientist.
Oh,
sure.
Wow.
So back to your central question, though. I mean, Yes, we've got problems in this country with divisiveness. And do you want me to jump into some thoughts about how it could be reduced, or is that
Yeah,
really a second
yeah,
question?
because I've talked to a lot of people about this and that, but nobody has the background that you have. Specifically looking at other countries who've maybe gone through tough times and gotten out of it. And one of the biggest difficulties everybody else I've interviewed has is most people have no clue how to fix it. They have solutions, but then they're like, I don't know if this is really going to work. Like, I mean, they have answers like get rid of filibuster,
Yes.
change, but they're like, at the end of the day, they go, I hope it works. So you're in actual peace and conflict studies. You've actually studied conflicts who've been in worse situations than we are now and gotten out of it, and maybe not as bad. And so I'd like to get right to the thing that you're the best expert on compared to the other guests. How is it possible to get out of this at this level of polarization? Have you seen other societies do it? How did they do it? How do we do it? How's it possible?
Well, certainly, I take a systems perspective and a perspective from social science, and I draw on my research and so forth. So maybe to ease into your question, just a couple of thoughts about the peace system research, because that's what I'm doing now, and it has implications. So first of all, we're thinking, and this is my research team, including my wife Genevieve Suliak, who I just mentioned, also Peter Coleman, who you mentioned in the introduction from Columbia, and others were part of this team. And we looked at peace systems in comparison to a randomly chosen group of other societies. So what is a peace system? It's simply, for our purpose, a cluster of neighboring societies that don't make war with each other. And we started with a series of hypotheses, thinking that peace systems successfully maintain the peace among clusters of neighboring groups, neighboring societies, neighboring nations in some cases. And how are they doing that? Are they doing something different from simply a randomly selected group of other neighbors? And I'll just give you some of our hypotheses first.
Please,
And,
please.
and most of them were supported, not all of them. So one is an overarching sense of identity. And if you think about polarization, that's part of what we're lacking. We're not lacking this overall sense that we're all Americans, we're all people, we're all facing the same issues and have the same needs. But that's what peace systems have. They belong to a particular tribe or to a particular nation, and they have that identity, but they also have an overarching identity of something more. So a concrete example of this would be what's happening right now in the Nordic countries, the 5 countries of Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Denmark, Finland. They have their national identities, but they also see themselves as part of something larger, and that's a Nordic land, a Nordic idea. And in fact, there's a term now, which was relatively new to me, Norden, to refer to their region. And they cooperate well, and hardly anybody knows that none of those 5 countries have warred with each other or amongst each other for over 200 years. Just fun facts to share, right? Over 200 years of not warring with each other. And so this meets our definition of a peace system, clusters of neighboring societies that don't war with each other, and for quite a while. And notice that I just want to be clear on one little side point that's important, that we're not saying peace systems don't war, period. Some peace systems don't make war, period, but some systems will engage in conflict outside the system.
Right.
So
External.
that's an important point just to keep in mind, because some of your listeners would certainly wonder about that if I hadn't mentioned this right now. So overarching identity is one thing that peace systems have, which other societies have less developed. And then interdependence is an interesting feature as well, where they're linked in terms of economic or environmental constraints that tend to hold them together or let them more easily perceive that we're in this together. And so forth, we need to address common concerns and issues and problems on a shared cooperative basis. So that's another feature. We actually discovered as part of our research that norms, peaceful norms, non-warring norms, but peace-promoting norms are the single most important variable that separates out a peace system on the one hand from a non-peace system on the other hand. And I must say, in a way, I'd read enough that I'm not surprised. And in another way, I was surprised that this was the single most important factor out of several that we looked at as to why peace is different. And now this will segue, and I think I'll switch over to your central question about polarization. This will segue right into that because when you have strong norms that you behave in a particular way and you don't behave in other ways, that really does have an influence. And so, one approach out of several here that I would talk about is voice those norms as to how we should behave. For example, when we're facing any type of issue that involves the country politically, then we should look together to the norm of, well, what's good for the country overall, not what's just good for my political career or what's good for my own little piece of the pie or my state or something like this, but what is really sensible and good for the country overall. And so if it's a peace system, they have norms that peace is important. Probably democracy or some set of shared governance is also important. Human rights, respect for diversity. Some of these types of values that are peace promoting and peace assisting tend to come together, tend to be part of an overall complex of ideas and so forth. So if we jump back to identity, I was talking about overall or overarching identity. That one article that you flashed up there, I wrote some years ago about this identity issue. Yeah, there we go. You just one back. There we go. Group identity as an obstacle and also a catalyst of peace. What I've noticed in the social science literature and in society and just generally, there seems to be a real assumption, and assumptions may be right, assumptions may be wrong, but there's a real assumption that there's the us versus the them.
Right.
And some of my more biologically inclined colleagues have written about, oh, it must be in our heredity, it must be in our genes or evolution, and we tend to see these groups and so on. Well, actually, as a social anthropologist and peace and conflict studies person, I look across cultures and we're doing this peace system research. It's not so easy as that. And I think any thinking individual, as you said in your intro, if they contemplate this, they will see right away that they don't have one single identity that's set and fixed. They probably have multiple identities as that individual. They belong to a particular community, maybe a neighborhood. They have a state identity, perhaps. It may be strong or it may be weak. I've moved around and lived in so many different states in the United States. I don't have such a strong state identity, but I run into people who, born and raised in North Carolina, that's their state, and they are okay. Identity is malleable and flexible, and we all have different ones. We're also members of the United States, so we have that national identity.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, and I include myself in this, have a sense of an overall human identity, a cosmopolitan idea that we're all humans and we're all on this planet. And in fact, there's a lot of people writing now about it would really be sensible for our own interest, but also due to evidence coming out in different fields, that we really have a mammalian identity, or don't stop with mammals. We have an identity with other creatures on this planet that we really need to take into consideration. So whether you believe that or not, my point here is that we have multiple identities, and sometimes we have a hierarchy of identities, from the community to the state to the country, even up to the global or whatever. So with this idea of expanding the us to include the them, that's how I like to take us versus them and turn it over and say, let's expand the us to include the them. This is what a variety of people and a variety of communities do all the time. They take folks that are on the periphery or outside or different, and they bring them in. And that's exactly what the peace systems are doing. They're taking, there's these 10 tribes in Brazil, the Upper Xingu River region. They have different languages, 4 different language groups. They're rather similar in the way they make their living as horticulturalists and fisher people in the rivers and so forth. So there's some elements of shared culture, but there's differences as well. And they've created a peace system. They haven't warred with each other as long as we have records back into the 1800s as neighbors who live together, clusters of neighbors that don't war with each other. And to the contrary, they've built all sorts of ways for this expanded identity. So yes, they may feel that they're Mayanaku, they speak the language Mayanaku, but they also are part of this larger social system. So we have many anthropologists to thank for this wonderful research, including Thomas Greger, now retired from Vanderbilt University, who talked about this peace system. But there's various examples of this, like I say, from the Nordic countries nowadays to the European Union, by the way, to tribes and local cultural groups who live side by side in peace, get along with each other. And again, there's a whole variety of different ways they manage to break down polarization, expand the us to include the them, have norms. Interestingly, the Zynga group, let me just comment on norms for a second here. For the Zynga group, they believe that acting non-aggressively, peacefully, is moral, but acting aggressively is immoral. Well, there you go. The morality question comes in. And so they want to be moral, civilized human beings, and they will point the finger, especially at Portuguese white. Look how violent they are. That's not moral, and so on. Same idea from Norden, from the Nordic countries. They now have developed a norm as to how to deal with conflict. And in fact, some people over in the Nordic countries are calling this the Nordic peace brand. They're branding it. Wow, I thought that was cool. That's a relatively recent concept as well. We're going to brand ourselves as 5 countries, as a region, for being peaceful. And currently this year, they're working on, we're going to be the most environmental, sustainably activating countries on the planet. That's their goal for here we're now 7 years from now, 2030. They want to be leading the world in terms of their sustainable development and sustainable use of resources and everything. Wow, I just think that's really kick-ass, but that's sort of a side point. My point is they have their norms that were peaceful. Going to war with each other, can't even visualize that. War is literally unthinkable at this point among the Nordic nations. Instead, what one commentator said, the norm now is don't pick up a gun, pick up the telephone. So they discuss, they negotiate, they haggle. They're all friends. At the end of the day, they somehow work it out. They may use mediators in some cases, but basically it's a governing by consensus, very different from the United States system right now. The idea of consensus, that you will form a group impression. Maybe not everybody fully agrees, but they understand it's more important to do something and get something done. So even I don't agree on this, I'm not going to try to block it or storm out of the room. A little bit of that going on sometimes. In Finland, I know of an example where the Green Party did storm out of the room. They were so incensed. But they come back. They're back. And the overall principle, the norm, is that we work together. We try to arrive at consensus. In any case, we talk, we discuss, we negotiate, and we work it out for the good of the country or the good of the region, now in this case of Norden.
I love that. The Nordic countries also have the highest standard of living in the world, I think, over the last 20 years. And they do better on basically every form of democracy American and the Western worlds care about. And they do better than all of Western Europe and America on those things like freedom of press and treatment of prisoners, etc. So they're crushing it.
I was over there before one of the elections, presidential elections in the States, and I got razzed quite a bit. It's like, okay, what is this electoral college stuff? Don't you guys understand anything over in the United States? It's one person, one vote. We're a little country. We have over 5 million people. One person, one vote. That's how you do democracy. You don't try to create complicated formula and blah, blah, blah. So what could I say? I just said, yeah, I personally agree with you. And I remember your point was, it's a political point. It's a social point that they're proud of their democracy, and it's very effective for them.
They have the highest standards in the world. I remember when the 2016 election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, there was a brief moment where Hillary was complaining about her aides, her staff, because they kept telling her, why can't we be like a Nordic country? And she literally released a statement going, it's unrealistic to assume that America will be like one of these enlightened Nordic countries, you have to accept what you get, basically, is what she said. And
Mm.
she was frustrated because so many people who were the smartest people advising her were going, yeah, we're not doing it right. It's these other guys over here. And she
Well,
basically said, shut
The
up.
Nordic, yeah.
She basically told
I
them, shut
vaguely
up, I don't want
remember
to
what
hear.
you're getting at there. That does ring a memory
She said it
bell
publicly.
for me.
Publicly
Yeah.
repudiated it. Didn't do it privately, publicly repudiated it. Shut up talking about the Nordic countries. We're never going to be them. And she was the
Well, I
good
mean that
candidate.
in a more general sense, not just Hillary Clinton, but anybody that says, it's always been this way and it always will be that way, can be shown to be wrong in so many different exampple.
If
Because
I may,
life is change, and change is the rule, not staying the same. So we
what
really need to shape the change as best we can. And sometimes we don't have much influence, but sometimes we certainly can. Now, in Finland, for instance, where I lived for almost 2 decades, I had a great opportunity as a person and as an anthropologist to see how that society was working. And certainly in a theoretical, and I would argue in a practical way, if we just set our minds to it and really wanted to do that, we could, over some time, not too long, but over some time, make our society much more like the Finnish society, if we wanted to go in that direction. So, for example, specifics are good. When I first arrived there as going to be visiting professor, I was talking to the immigration official, and I asked her, I got the thought, I said, oh, well, what if I become ill? Should I get some insurance? How would I do that? Where do I get insurance if I? And she looked at me and said, I don't understand. I said, well, what if, heaven forbid, I would have an accident, I get hit by a car or I'd get ill? How would I be covered? And she says, oh, well, of course you'd be treated in the hospital. It would be inhumane not to treat you. I'm going, wow, that's refreshing. Inhumane not to treat me. So this is a central Finnish value, equality and caring for people. And they have, like, almost every other country that's well developed in the West and elsewhere, unlike the United States, they have a very good universal health care. And
yeah,
that's reflecting their view of humanitarianism and equality. It's not layered, it's not structured, it's not based on your income, it's not based on who you work for, it's not based on race or any other of these markers. No, it's just everybody is covered. Yeah, sure.
apologize, studio malfunction. We're back.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Did we get disconnected there?
No, I spilled a cup of water on the floor and I needed to dry it up before I got to the
Oh
electronics.
my gosh. Okay.
We're good. We're good.
That's usually my maneuver.
No. We're back. Okay. So the question though is, I understand that we could be Finland if we wanted to. I've heard this from other people. I remember seeing the Finnish prison director come to America and talk about how we could change our prisons and that they're atrocious and horrible and they're designed to only make more problems. And I totally agree. And I agree that a lot of the other Nordic countries are doing quite well and we should be following them. My question for you would be, given the level of polarization we have now in America, where we basically had January 6th, how do we get from there to Finland? And do you have examples of societies who've done it?
Well, again, I think my bag of examples. Whoops, now my battery is getting low. So let me get this thing plugged in real quickly.
Uh-oh.
There we go. Okay, another disaster barely missed, as they say.
Sorry.
Let me just try to sort of give you a short list and then we can elaborate a little
Yeah.
bit. One thing I've learned from my research is that leadership really does matter. And this can be leadership for polarization. It can be leadership for inclusiveness. And what I think many people just don't really put credence in the power and the significance of having a good leader who clearly states a goal or a vision. We want to become depolarized. We want more unity in society. And then directly starts addressing this and communicates to the people. And what I've learned in my examples from looking at peaceful societies and peace systems and so forth, most of the people actually want peace. It's not like they want to go to war. They prefer to live in security and have a normal life and a good social life. So again, here's the leadership factor. Well, you can get leaders where it's in their sort of perceived self-interest to star something up. Maybe they can go and get some resources. Maybe they can claim some territory or get more followers or have more tribute or whatever. And they'll rile people up to the us versus them. Well, there are also peace leaders who do the exact opposite. And they point out, war is hell. Aren't you all tired of war? I'm certainly tired of war. So what can we do about this? And give their speeches and make their decisions and move their societies towards a more inclusive and peaceful future. So this idea of leadership is one. Again, we can talk more about this if you want. I already mentioned the expanding the us to include the them. So, and again, leaders can have a role in this, but we can all have a role in this. So rather than just accepting the usual story, right, the typical narrative that there's always going to be the us versus the them, and we're always sort of in some whoever the them is, right? It switches all the time. But no, just don't accept that, and reach out across any divides that might be there that you might perceive or others might perceive. Just be a normal human being in your daily life. Talk to people. And don't get all riled up. So anything you can do to point out that, look, we're all members of this state, or we're all members of this country, or we're all the human race, draw on the catalyst for peace, as you've got on the screen there. Identity is a catalyst for peace. And again, I'm not just saying this as an opinion off the top of my head or what have you. It's really based on our research with peace systems. We had an article published a couple of years ago in the very prestigious group of journals by Nature. And that's a remarkable accomplishment. And it blows me away.
Impressive.
It's got 14,000 reads at the moment. So this is the core finding of our peace system research is getting quite a lot of attention. For an academic article, 14,000 reads in 2 years, that's something. So that's indicating, or what I put, it makes me feel good, is what I really need to say, that people are interested in this topic, and that we're, with our peace system research, providing some insight. So I just wanted to clarify that there is a science behind some of these things I'm saying, like expand the us to include the them. Peace leadership is important, and we can add here bipolarizing leadership is important. I already mentioned norms a little bit. That also came out of our research. So if we just, so there's an interesting application here for norms, and that's social media. And one of my colleagues, Lisa Scherch, is on a YouTube, and she's pointing out that there seems to be a discrepancy between the way most people behave towards each other in face-to-face normal community interaction, and then how they behave when they get online. And to my thinking, this relates to the norms. We seem to have either dropping out of norms, or all of a sudden you get online and social media and a whole different set of norms apply. And of course, there's a spillover effect because we're social beings. We get on social media, we come off, our emotions are riled up, we've been influenced, hurt, or we've hurt somebody or whatever. So this is new. I mean, we haven't had social media and the internet very long, but this is a big issue where I think we really need to give some explicit attention to depolarize and be inclusive, be civil, be inclusive. I said that already. All the good things we would just do in normal life. You see somebody drop something, you quickly lean over and pick it up for them, right? Well, we need this type of little norm, social norm, for social media and the internet as well. And I think that would help a lot. So this is beginning to get attention. But I think we really need to put a lot more attention into how we need to be polite, civil, open-minded, engage in, as the Nordics do, discussion, negotiation at times, try to reach some understanding, learn from each other. This is a different normative system, which again, many of us do this in our daily lives with people. What's so different about this electronic media now all of a sudden? There's another point, I have a couple of others, but one that we haven't talked about yet, which is also very important, is when you see people with a common interest, well, all of a sudden they have an interest to work together. And this can be huge, and this can be harnessed. So, for example, your plane crashes, the life boats, inflate, and there's a bunch of you in the lifeboat, and everybody grabs a paddle and starts paddling. Well, no, not quite. You should all paddle in the same direction, right? Should we go towards the green sea, or should we go towards that island over there? So all of a sudden, you're in the lifeboat. Literally, your survival depends on rowing together and getting to that island or to that land. And this is not such a difficult concept. People do this all the time. But sometimes they get so blocked by either the norms or the lack of leadership or other factors, their own prejudices, that they don't see this. They don't see how obvious it is. So climate change, the climate crisis, I would say, is the big one. We're all individual countries here. We should be all rowing together to solve this threat to human survival. And some are and some aren't, and we're sort of going our own way, and we're not doing enough, and some are doing a lot, and most are not doing enough, and so on and so on. So when you have a shared interest, that can facilitate the cooperation and the goodwill, and over time the trust that breaks down bipolarization, breaks down all of these us versus thems. The real world example would be the Mediterranean.
Just real quick. We got about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, this is a wonderful way to end, I think. I find this inspirational. Hardly anybody has ever heard of the Mediterranean Action Plan. I bet you haven't, just to guess.
The what?
Exactly. Mediterranean Action Plan.
No, I have not.
And basically, it's under the United Nations Environmental Program. And it's why you can still swim in the Mediterranean Sea and enjoy the seafood out of the sea and go to the beaches, and they're beautiful beaches. In the 1970s, the Mediterranean was going to be a dead sea. It was being polluted in all quarters. And the Mediterranean Action Plan is basically this coordinated effort of all of the countries that have beaches and shores along the Mediterranean, and now the EU is part of it as well. And they've all been working together for decades to protect their shared resource. And as one of the founders of this whole Mediterranean Action Plan pointed out, anybody polluting the sea is polluting the sea for everybody. And it's an easy concept to grasp. We have to do this together. We have to work together. And that broke down hostilities, and it's cooperated even when there's been literally wars going on amongst some of these countries and other tensions. They've still cooperated to protect and to save their shared resource. So you can see the analogy to climate change. You can see the analogy to just working together to get good things, important things done in society. It's a powerful lesson, I think. It's a real world lesson that shows how when you have a common vision and you have a shared interest, countries and people do work together. They can work together. So there's some obstacles to that must be overcome. But it's certainly a strong catalyst also for breaking down the bipolarization.
This is a good example, the Mediterranean Action Plan. People actually did it.
Absolutely. And they're continuing to do it. You start Googling about it. It's got its website, nice overall intro video and so forth. I wrote on it in some article I wrote a long time ago, but that's sort of stodgy academic, I'm afraid. But it's a wonderful real life example of working together.
Do you have another prime example? Just one more that you thought was pretty good of, people.
Well, yes. Okay. Well, again, at international level, the Montreal Protocol to protect the ozone layer. People often say, we'll never be able to work together globally. Well, nonsense. Countries and other units work together all the time. There's this thing called the International Postal Union. You can send mail anywhere you want around. That takes a lot of cooperation, and everybody takes it for granted. But the Mediterranean Action Plan literally helped reverse the hole in the ozone layer, which, by the way, unfortunately is now being threatened by all these wildfires. So that's another example where virtually every country on the planet came together to limit these chemicals which were destroying the ozone. The richer countries helped the poorer countries to finance this. Manufacturers, business got involved. They realized we need an Earth also. That hole in the ozone layer would have been devastating. It would ruin crops. It would increase skin cancers. If you ruin crops, then you have famines and so on. And this was all cut off. And nowadays, hardly anybody knows that because it was a disaster that never happened.
Right.
But it was only possible through people realizing their shared concern, their common interest, and therefore we're going to work together to solve this one. So it's not all doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be. There's plenty of situations now on the planet where we need to do this. So let's hope we can.
Let's hope we can. I'm sorry we have to cut it there. Would you ever be willing to come back?
Absolutely. Love to. Thank
We'll
you
do
for
that.
having me. I really enjoyed sharing some thoughts and hearing your questions.
I really appreciate it. We'll have you back on. I'm going to send you an email here in a little bit with a copy of the video. If you know anybody else who might be willing to be part of an honest conversation, we always like to keep it going. You don't have to name anybody, but if somebody pops to mind, throw it in an email. We'll leave it there. I'm sorry, I got to cut it short there, Professor, but I will email shortly and I will have you back on.
Well, sounds nice both ways. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you
Keep
so
up
much.
what you're doing. It's a wonderful project.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for coming out.
Sure
I'll
thing.
email you shortly. I promise.
Take care.